This week, the NHS England banned the use of puberty blockers to help essentially gender-distressed children. I mean, for years, there's been discussion about the potential side effects of these drugs. I mean, the NHS has finally come out and said that we can't even account for either the safety or the efficacy of them. I mean, why did this not happen sooner? How did it go on for so long, Julia?
I'm a mum. I can remember being chastised for giving a double dose of Calpol to my baby. For God's sake, you're advised don't give children anything. Their bodies, their brains are developing. Within the womb, and even at the age of 12, only half a paracetamol. Oh no. Oh, you're 14, you're a bit confused and upset, you've maybe got autism, you may or may not have been abused, or maybe you're gay and you just think your parents are homophobic. So, yeah, absolutely, let's give you drugs that will completely alter your body, completely alter your hormones, your brain, damage your bone density. Oh, may well give you liver cancer. That's fine, because don't worry, it's just a temporary thing. Now, one thing we know, what happened at the Tavistock Clinic and other clinics that do this, that actually it's pretty much a one-way street. You get on the puberty blocker, or you turn up at these clinics, the next day you're on puberty blockers, and then you are on a one-way track to the most horrific kind of changes to your body, self-mutilation. I mean, cutting off healthy breast tissue or cutting off, healthy penises and things like that. I'm sorry, that's body mutilation. We wouldn't allow people who said, I didn't like my right arm to cut. We wouldn't go around cutting their right arms off for them. It's no different.
You wouldn't tell someone with anorexia, yes, you are really fat and we'll help you.
We should actually help you lose weight. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And that is what this is. There are no such things as trans kids. There are kids who are confused and mixed up and who need our help. And these clinics were not doing that and have not been doing that and are still not doing that, because Tavistock is still open right now today. It's just down the road from me, and so I'm very aware of that. No, but this is the problem, is that they've known all this time these were experimental drugs. 20 years ago, clinicians at the Tavistock were saying, a bit worried about this. What do we know about the long-term impacts? And they didn't care. No other treatment would be allowed. No other treatment would be allowed. People die of cancer because a cancer treatment hasn't been tested far enough. But no, that's fine. Give these drugs to perfectly healthy children. This has been one of the biggest child abuse scandals of our time. I'm certainly glad, I know you two and me, we've been on the right side of history on this one, largely being in favour of not mutilating children and ruining their lives. But it is extraordinary it's taken this long. And by the way, it's all happened under a Conservative government who ostensibly are in charge of the NHS and allowed this to happen under their watch for so long. And I think shame on everybody involved.
Yeah, I think, even just hearing just some of the basic facts about puberty blockers, the brand name is Lupron. It was developed to stop prostate cancer, essentially. Not something that young children suffer from, usually. It's also the same drug and the same dose, incredibly, that they give to paedophiles when they want to chemically castrate them.
I mean, that's got to be a good thing, then, hasn't it? Giving that to a kid. Also, rendering them infertile. And unable to ever achieve any sexual gratification, no orgasm. You can't, at the age of 14, consent to that.
No, exactly. And that's something which has been surely obvious for some time, and yet the refusal to own up to that. How can you have a child who hasn't even gone through puberty yet to consent to a treatment pathway which leads on to another treatment pathway, which will effectively end with, again, not being able to have sex in the usual way, not being able to kind of experience those natural feelings. It's the sort of thing where you think you're expecting them to consent to something which they have no kind of concept of whatsoever. You're often leaning on parents, has often been the example, kind of blackmailing them to go down this particular path, otherwise they're going to kill themselves, these horrendous, spurious kind of emotional...
stat that's not borne out.
Exactly, all complete nonsense. And the other thing is that up until we went down this ridiculous road in relation to medicalising children and sterilising them under this idea that they've got a mismatched gender, all of the data pointed to the fact that experiences of, whether you want to call it gender dysphoria or just gender confusion or whatever, the cure to it is puberty, basically. That's something that you saw, that it tended to be young boys in particular who would have this feeling, this anxiety, this sense of incongruence. But as they would go through puberty, that would alleviate as they sexually matured, as they entered into relationships, etc., and they often turn out to be gay. So what we've ended up with is basically taking away the cure to the gender dysphoria and also sterilising and converting young gay kids in particular. It's a horrendous mess. I think the fact that the NHS have made this kind of emphatic statement, introduced this ban, is really telling of how strong the evidence is. Because I imagine the higher-ups at the NHS would have done anything to keep this going. even if they were
only the
ignorant
Cass
of
review
it.
would have made this happen, and that was what, 2 years ago.
Well, this is exactly
But again,
it.
it's still
they would
able
have
to
loved to
happen
have
in
said it's
Scotland.
actually fine in some circumstances. The fact that they couldn't, I think, speaks volumes.
I find it very difficult sitting next to someone so transphobic. I mean, why are you not in favour of mutilating children and ruining their lives? Why not? Why don't you care? Why are you dehumanising? I mean, but it's still available in Scotland. Still be available in Wales. Also in private clinics. Now that is going to be a really big issue. I mean, because actually an awful lot of this is happening, and it's the middle classes who just sort of play along with all this madness and go along with it, and the schools that are doing this. I mean, I live in North London. I've got a teenage daughter. This stuff is rampant. It is absolutely rampant. Girls are watching this stuff, and again, it's interesting how it went from being a small number of men to being a huge number, thousands of teenage girls, particular social contagion in particular schools. One girl does a lot of troubled girls obviously unhappy about their sexuality or unhappy about sort of the over-sexualization of the world around them. I understand that as well.
Their bodies.
Their bodies gender, and just looking at YouTube of some girl who's slashed her breasts off and has said, "Oh look, now I'm happy." I mean, that's where that level of stuff. That's how these girls are being influenced. It's just so beyond obscene that this has been allowed to happen, and the adults have not been in charge. And the parents, the medics, all the people who are supposed to keep children safe have failed them. My thing about this is I need people to be prosecuted. We have got to start having more actual accountability and not just, we're closing you down. You had no right to ever do this. I'm a daughter of a GP. First, do no harm. They first did harm. And anyone who carried along with it when other people were blowing the whistle or were resigning from the Tavistock and elsewhere, and you carried on doing this stuff, I'd like you prosecuted.
And Tom, I mean, I just wanted to raise that question with you. Where were the adults in all this? How did people get dragged along with it? Why did they think it was more important to follow the word of activists over medical evidence?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because on the one hand, there is the problem of capture, as we often talk about, because of the fact that you've had institutions like WPATH, which I know you spoke about in the podcast last week, which was trusted as this, kind of masqueraded as we are the group that deals with this. We have the evidence. I assumed
they were these experts.
No, exactly. The fact that they're just a kind of an array of trans activists that you might naturally encounter on social media is very telling. So there is that kind of sense of, of course, people who work in the NHS, they can't be an expert in everything. They're going to refer it to the clinic that's devoted to it. They're going to look at the guidelines, which have been drawn up by these supposed experts. So there's a lot of that going on. And I think people didn't quite realise how deep the rot runs.
It was their job.
It was. And I think, especially when concerns started to be raised, the fact that this wasn't taken seriously was absolutely outrageous. I think particularly what I find so unpleasant about this is that the whole kind of trans kids thing has been pushed so emphatically, particularly by older trans activists, often trans themselves, because what they feel that they need to kind of justify their cause by saying it's naturally occurring, it's actually much more widespread than you think. And so in a sense, these confused young people have been sacrificed at the altar of this agenda. And that's the most disgusting thing about it, I think, is that you've got older individuals who are basically exploiting some quite troubled young people for the sake of furthering their own cause and burnishing their own sense of themselves. And it's, aside from the medical scandal involved and all the rest of it, that real kind of moral depravity is something that I don't think we can.
I think there's also an element. I'm not in any way saying this is the majority, but I still think there also is an element of the trans ideological activist where there is also a much more depraved aspect of this of keeping children looking like they're pre-adolescent. And I'm sorry, that's something that I think is going to be coming more to the fore as it comes forward. The hatred of women, the desire for children to look like they're prepubescent. There is a strand, and it's only a strand. It's not that I'm not in any way saying trans people are paedophile. I'm not saying that categorically. I'm not saying that, but there is a strand among the activists, which very much is so, and you can see this easily on social media in terms of what they're pushing. The justification, was it minor attracted person people? I mean, things like that. Sorry, we have a word for that. It's called paedophile. I think there is something much more sinister going on as well among some strands of this.